Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the life science leadership podcast with me, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International. Today's guest is Frank Binder, a global supply chain transformation leader with a career that leads and reads like a masterclass in operational excellence and cross-cultural leadership. He's led global supply chain functions at Santen, Celgene and Novartis, not just overseeing logistics and planning, but shaping strategy, driving digitalization and elevating supply chain from the background to the boardroom. From Europe to Asia to the US, Frank's hands-on experience spans every link in the chain, starting in chemical production, moving through S&OP and global distribution. But what really stands out is his ability to lead through complexity, align diverse teams and challenge cultural norms to unlock better ways of working. So in this episode, we dive into Frank's leadership journey from admitting he was not a born leader to becoming one of the most trusted voices in global pharma supply chain. We explore how he builds high-performing global teams, how to navigate negotiations in different regions, and what the future of supply chain leadership looks like. Frank, welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
No problem. Thank you. You and I have known each other for some time, and we've had many interesting discussions on all things supply chain and leadership. So I'm really pleased that we get to bring these together for the audience today. But one of the things we always ask in the Active Ingredients podcast is, what do you think are the three key ingredients of successful leadership and why?
Yeah, I think it has to start with a real ambition and interest in leading, not for like elevating yourself as a person, but for a purpose. But the willingness has to be there, the interest has to be there. Then I think what is crucial is the ability and the interest to engage with people. That means listen to people, process what and learn what you hear, and then engage in a real dialogue with people. And the third one, I would say, is developing a vision. I mean, if you want to be a leader, you have to know where you want to go. And because that's what people want to know from you. So the vision element is extremely important for a leader as well.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. So ambition and interest in leading with a purpose, listening and engaging with people, and then developing a vision. So if we kind of take things back, let's rewind back to the early years, right? Before you had these thoughts of active ingredients of leadership. I mean, what were you like growing up? Did you see yourself going into life sciences when you were in a young age or at university or anything like that?
Well, when I was at high school, first of all, I was really much more interested in things like history and politics, and I'm still very interested in that. But I had no intention at all to go into life sciences, and it was really through high school when I developed, hey, I enjoy mathematics, and then when I had my first chemistry lessons, I thought, hey, that is something very interesting, and I was really hooked on chemistry. That became really my dream of becoming a chemist, and that's how I got into life sciences. Was really through university studies in chemistry, and then later a PhD in physical chemistry. But it wasn't at the beginning that it wasn't at all what I was interested in early on.
No, so taking the history and politics, so your kind of love and thirst for knowledge, but then being able to channel it into the chemistry, and then seeing that life sciences was a potential industry or career path for you. And where, if for the listeners, where did you grow up? Where did you live?
So I grew up first in Germany, Frankfurt am Main, and then when I was 11 years old, family moved to Switzerland, and I did my whole schooling and university in the beautiful city of Bern.
Lovely. And do you think, like looking back, moving as an 11-year-old to, Switzerland, was there more access or more visibility of life sciences organizations than perhaps you were seeing in Frankfurt and Germany?
Yeah, Frankfurt has quite some, has the Farb, had back then it was the Farbwerke Höchst, where my cousin made his apprenticeship, and so I was always the chemistry, chemical industry, and life science industry was present there as well. But then later, when I was in Switzerland, and especially during my studies, there was, of course, Basel as the big and still today very big and very successful life science strategic hub. There was also Geneva with medical device companies, but also chemical companies like Givaudan, for example, Firmenich especially. So there was always a strong industrial background close to where I lived. Yes.
Yeah, it is quite interesting because it's even when you get to the, airports in Switzerland, a lot of the big posters and the signage is, pharmaceutical, biotech, CDMO companies, which I find quite interesting. If you go to the UK as an example, the access of knowledge of those companies is way lower. So I always wonder if, growing up in Switzerland or being at university gives you access in a different way to those types of organizations.
I think it makes you think differently. I think in UK, for some reasons, pharma companies tend to have a lower profile. Also some political reasons, quite honestly. But in Switzerland, it's part of the national pride. Hey, we depend. As a country, we depend very much on the life sciences industry, and there is, I think, a high recognition and a high appreciation for the industry.
Yeah, love that. So now I've got this understanding of you, though, Frank. Right? So you're obviously very curious, as I said earlier, with a thirst for knowledge, but leadership. You and I have had a conversation previously where you said, I was not a born leader at all. Tell me about that moment in the Swiss Air Force that kind of changed your thoughts and feelings of the potential of Frank.
Yeah, as you said, yeah. So I wasn't definitely not a born leader. I was more like a somewhat nerdy and shy kid, reading a lot of books, and then I got into computer programming. I might have ended up in IT. Luckily, it was life sciences in the end. But I was really more focusing on reading, learning, doing things by myself. So I had never the image of myself as a leader. And my first leadership experience indeed was in the Swiss Air Force when I was on duty. In Switzerland, it's like you go into a boot camp, like 4 months, and then every year you have to go and repeat for 3 weeks. You go back to the military, put on your uniform, grab your gun, and go and into active duty. Early on, I think it was the second time I was called up. We were my unit. It was a very technical unit. Of course, I'm not talking about what we did for obvious reasons, but we were thrown into a quite unusual situation. There was something that we had to work on as a unit, and we ended up in some command post, and for some reasons we didn't have enough officers, not enough commissioned or non-commissioned officers. So there was a kind of lot of simple soldiers just like me, and a lack of cadre, basically lack of command structure. And together with 5 other guys who were about the same age as me, maybe some a little bit more experienced, we were given a task to do some analysis and produce a daily report at the end of the day. So reporting is hugely important in the military environment, by the way.
Yeah.
And I thought immediately, oh, this could be interesting. This could be really interesting work, but it wasn't obvious because there was no structure, there was no process, nothing. And what I did is I gathered the 5 other guys together and said, hey, we could really have a good time if we get our act together. If we set ourselves up in a way that enables us to produce this daily report, and if it goes well, it would be quite interesting work. What do you think? And the others agreed. They said, yeah, that sounds really nice. And I started organizing the team, basically assigning different roles, putting in place some basic processes. And so we worked the first day and produced our first daily report. and it was very well received. Great feedback, and then that was for the remainder of the 3 weeks. That was what we got to do, and it was a nice job. It was in the office, no going out, no lugging heavy equipment in the rain, all that stuff. And that was when I realized, hey, I could actually have an impact. I could actually be working through others and do something that I couldn't do on my own. So that was my first leadership experience, and I really enjoyed it. I got my first and only promotion in the military based on that. At the end of the 3 weeks, I was made private first class, which I still formally am, or even though I'm not in active, of course, not in active service anymore. But it was a great experience that showed me, hey, I could be doing something I have never thought of, and working through others, achieving something that I couldn't do on my own. That was really motivated me then to later take and search for leadership positions.
Yeah, nice. So it was that kind of not being a born leader, but the intuition was there. And then you were able to develop a vision within those 5 people, listen and engage with them, and then, harness the ambition to go and speak to people and say, this could be something that we could do here that will actually make this next 3 weeks a lot more enjoyable. So you used your active ingredients, as you said at the beginning of the episode. So from that point, you've then started to, understand yourself a little bit more. Did you ever think, at that stage that you would be joining the world of supply chain management, or were you still thinking, chemistry, start in a large pharma and see where my career can develop?
Yeah, supply chain management was still a bit farther off for me. So I was when I did my PhD, I spent 4 years in a lab with high-tech equipment, lasers and stuff. That was all very nice, and I really liked working in chemistry. But then I realized that the lab was not the place I wanted to be for the rest of my career. And we had done, as students, some excursions, visiting some factories. And I really liked the manufacturing environment. I really was drawn to that, these big tanks and pipes, all this equipment. And I thought, becoming an industrial chemist, that would be something I really would like to do. And it wasn't it wasn't the conventional way. Out of university, out of research, you would do some postdoc or something. You would end up in a research lab in industry. But I wanted to go into manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, and that's why I spent, and indeed it was my first industry job, was being industrial chemist on the shop floor, making active ingredients by the tons.
Oh wow, fantastic! And then there was the moment that, after a couple of years, the moment that was perhaps the catalyst for the rest of the career was taking that role at Accenture.
Yes.
So do you want to explain a little bit more, just for a bit of foundation layer, before we get into a lot of the detail that we want to talk about today? How was that the catalyst? How was that the change? And how did you actually get into the organization?
Yeah, I became really interested in how things work together. I mean, even as industrial chemist, I of course the role was much more diverse and interesting, I thought, for me than a research chemist, but it was still very confined. We get ingredients, we get primary materials in, we run a campaign, we make active ingredients, and then they go out. And I thought, hey, that's how does it fit together? And talking to some colleagues, I got some understanding how it fits together, but I got really, maybe I didn't have the patience to grow in my role, but I thought, hey, I want to see more. And back then, a friend of mine who was at Accenture as a management consultant motivated me to apply. And he said, hey, they're looking for life science people as well. And there's also really interesting stuff that's being done in the pharma industry. And I applied and entered into Accenture, and I spent the time there. working mostly in the pharmaceutical industry and mostly on supply chain projects, and that's where I got hooked on supply chain, because I found that is really how things fit together from end to end. Look at the patient who receives the treatment, and then all the way back to manufacturing and primary materials. And I found this is very interesting because it's not very complicated. I mean, I had when I was back in the university, was quantum physics and stuff like that. Okay, that is complicated. But what I really liked is supply chain is not complicated, but it's complex. It's like a reflection of life. Everything fits together and is influenced by so many factors. And ever since I have been in supply chain, and I've never regretted that.
Yeah, and it's one of those parts of society, that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think you were saying recently Marco Polo was a supply chain guy. It's like the simplification of this really complex beast is key. And I think, as you said, that being the catalyst to go and understand lots of different ways of working at Essentia, working on lots of different projects with lots of different companies, must have been really enlightening at the time.
It was, and this, in a way, this succession of projects where we could go looking at the supply chain of a pharma company based in the US, going to Europe, going to Japan, and understand how it all fits together, map it out, look for opportunities, and this succession of different projects, that in a way that suited me really well, and maybe in a way also it ruined me for I couldn't do a complete 9-to-5 job anymore, where every day is basically the same as the day before. And if somebody tells me, hey, look, there is this supply chain, it works very, very nicely, all you have to do is improve it every year by 1%, I would get so bored. And in a way, this really motivated me, but it also got me hooked on having different experiences, doing different things, and looking at different elements of the supply chain.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so this is a really good foundational layer. So we've understood now a little bit more about education, getting into the leadership world, a bit of the chemistry production. Now your understanding of supply chain through that Essentia model. Let's talk about leadership. Like, when did you feel that you were first a leader within the space?
Yeah, I think one very enriching leadership experience was at Novartis, where I had a quite big team, 12 direct reports, but I really found that I enjoyed that, and there were very different people, different personalities, and we were working basically a lot with the US as well, a lot with different partners in different European countries, and that was really very, very enriching, because it allowed me to really live the complexity and the variability, and also it was my first experience where I really had to work across cultures, which I then did later, especially at Celgene and at Santen in an even stronger way, but at Novartis, it was the first time I was confronted with leading people across different cultures.
Yeah, and how did you find, mentors or people that had been through that previously? Did you find those within the group at Novartis, people that you could learn from?
Yeah, actually, the leader who hired me and who was then the head of global supply chain at Novartis, Kurt Reber, was the greatest mentor and the greatest leader I could ever dream of. Somebody who had an extreme understanding of the whole picture. So he could be what you call the 30,000 feet perspective or whatever, looking at the entire things, how they fit together, and then drilling down to detail levels that were incredible. Mentally handle all that. That was one element. He was extremely strong on the professional side, but he also had a very genuine and deep interest in people, and from that also really great leadership abilities. What I mentioned also the element of vision, that was also something he was very strong on. So very quickly it became clear to me that, hey, this is I will never reach that level, and I still say it, I will never reach the level that Kurt Reber had, but this is an inspiration. This is how I want to be. And so I learned a lot from Kurt during my Novartis years. Later on, there have been other leaders that have been important to me, but for sure, Kurt was the first mentor and the biggest influence in my career.
Yeah, love that. Because sometimes, sadly, what we see is bad leadership is often the core memory that people have, and it's like, oh, I don't want to be like that leader.
Yeah.
And actually, if you can get that mentor at the right time, and I mean, you've had yours now for, a good part of your career. You've gone on to some really exciting things off the back of working with that person. I think that also the positivity of having a good mentor in your early development years as leadership is absolutely paramount.
Yes. I think it's much better there's always negative examples, and that can alert you to saying, hey, you don't want to be like this. But then the more interesting question is, okay, how do you want to be? And then, okay, you say in German, nobody is useless, because they can always serve as a bad example. And that is true. But on the other hand, it is much more important and much more positive if you have a positive example that you can strive to emulate.
Yeah, love that. So can I ask, you said that perhaps you weren't a born leader. Have you got any examples of seeing that in people in your teams and being able to maybe create the leader from within? Have you been able to be that mentor for them as well?
Yeah, there have been over the years a couple of people who didn't think they had it in them, but they were interested. They were interested in taking on a leadership role, but they just didn't believe they had it in them. And there's both for the transitions from being somebody doing the actual work to becoming a first line manager. There have been people I can say I've been able to coach and to develop. But then also the next step from being a first line manager to becoming manager of managers, this is a difficult one as well. And I had also really good managers, first line managers, whom I believed could take on the next level, manager of managers, and who did not believe in themselves. And in one such case, not too long ago, I was really able to show that colleague why I thought that they were doing great, what were the great things they were doing with their team, and why I believed that they could expand that to a larger group, but also giving them some advice on what are the pitfalls to avoid, because it is a very different role if you're manager of managers. You need to really move away completely from trying to micromanage. Even if you're a first line manager, you should not be micromanaging, but it becomes a disaster if you are manager of managers. And I was really happy to see that this colleague was really able to step up. And of course, I had not only promised that colleague my support if they were willing to do it, but also I had then very, very regular coaching sessions, and it worked out really well. This colleague today is a very respected leader, manager of managers.
Love that. And it seems like you've got quite a good vision on like the approach to building high performing teams. So that kind of manager of managers and the management group, what values matter most to you from a human or a personal element to get that team right?
Yeah, and first of all, what I try is to build a team with people who are different from me, because I think it's about augmenting, multiplying strengths. And if so, I'm actively looking for people who are strong in areas where I am not strong, and then in turn, I hope that I am strong in areas where they are not. So it should be complementary. And I have been luckily both at Celgene and at Santen have been really able to do that. And for me, it's about one thing is trust. You have to trust in each other, and you have to have a unity of purpose. And what I found really interesting is I have worked with people who approach things in a very different way, but I found that we had always the same objectives. We knew where we wanted to get. We just went there by different ways, and we had really open and honest discussions about it, and it worked extremely well. So you don't need. What I would like to avoid is to have a leadership team where people are just clones of me myself. That's no good. So I'm looking for a diverse team, and a trust and a common knowing that we have a common purpose is extremely important. But then also you have to go and we did that very systematically, develop the strategy and then the implementation roadmap together. What are the capabilities we want to build as a team? What are the projects we want to realize? And that has to be done together. And then we know we're all working on the same plan. That's essential.
Yeah, lovely. And then if we go back to your ability to, find the best in people, or create future leaders. When you're looking at leadership potential, what are the key things? So say if you're looking to build trust with these people in this diverse team, what's the leadership potential, or what are the things that you're looking for from somebody?
Yeah, I think they need to have some clear direction, some conviction on themselves. They have to have a strong motivation by themselves. They have to be able to engage with their teams and with their peers. They have to be able by themselves to build productive relationships. Because it's not, the idea is not that I direct everything. The team itself has to have some kind of self-organization. People have to be able to work autonomously together with each other. I think that is a key component of being in a team. So there should be, and the goal is not that everybody is friends with everybody. I mean, of course that can happen, and that's nice if it happens, but it's not that. It's about having working relationships. So if you agree on what goals you want to reach together and how to reach them together and work and then implement that. So there needs to be clarity of thought. There needs to be integrity. There needs to be professional capability. For sure, you have to be able to understand what it is about and how to put it together. But then integrity is maybe some of the most important things. Your colleagues, your teammates, everybody has to trust you.
Yeah,
that's a basis for collaboration.
Yeah, love that. The challenge that sometimes we see is that the trust and integrity is there, but sometimes a culture or a way of working can actually get in the way of building that really good global leadership team. And you've worked in some of the more challenging, different hierarchical structures or different, parts of the globe where maybe cultures are different and, the way they engage with a leader is different. How have you been able to manage and create, unified global teams when it is very, very difficult if you've got like a yes culture versus a no culture versus a really hierarchical? How did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to realize that there are these differences. There's no point in saying, oh yeah, in the end we all want the same. That is not really true, because the priorities are even different across cultures, and you have to you have to acknowledge that there is a difference between U.S. American, French, Dutch, Japanese, Chinese people. And so the first step is to realize that there are differences. And then what I found some of the most challenging as a leader is the role of hierarchy. And I believe to some extent you can't abolish it. If people are from a culture where hierarchy is highly regarded, that is just a fact of life. But still, you have to find ways to engage in productive discussions. And for me, a productive discussion is when somebody in my team is able to tell me, "Hey, Frank, you're wrong." And then, of course, they will have to explain to me why I'm wrong. But they have. If I'm in an environment where everybody will just say, "Yes, okay, we'll do it," and then they go ahead and do whatever I said, that's no good. So it's about getting to know, which is very important, I think, in a hierarchy dominated culture. I mean, if you work with Dutch people, for example, you will never have that problem, because when they think you're wrong, they will tell you in any circumstance. And I think that's actually good, because I don't aspire to be always right. That's ridiculous. So I think as a leader of a cross-cultural team, you need to provide a space where people feel safe to really give their opinion. And in a one-on-one relationship, that's one thing, but also in a team setting, because I want to have productive discussions with my team where we reach some breakthroughs. And there are some techniques, like how do you get people to say no without having them to say no, like the traffic light technique, which I found extremely effective, where people just can give you feedback in form of a traffic light on some proposal. Oh, I'm green on a proposal, I'm red on that proposal. That is just a great starting point, because then you know what people really think, and they don't have to go through the maybe stressful process of telling their boss, "No, I disagree with you." So there are some tactics you can use with that, but in the end, it's about people feeling safe. It's people need to know they can tell me I'm wrong without it having any negative consequence, and that's essential, I think.
Yeah. So that transforming yes cultures to no cultures is almost giving people the ability to speak up.
Yes.
And has that, have you got like examples of that taking time, where there almost is they've got to build that trust with you that it is a safe space?
It takes time. It takes time, months and months. You need to rebuild the relationship, and it's not enough just to say, "Hey, you can give me feedback. Don't worry about it." You actually have to prove it. So and then because if people give you some feedback and then you like smash them down and say, "Hey, that you're wrong," whatever, then they will immediately realize that what you've said before is maybe not the whole truth. So you have to walk the talk, and no matter what feedback you get, you have to first of all you have to accept it, acknowledge it, and then to see what can you do with it, but not slapping down somebody who says something that you don't like.
Yeah, and I've heard you call it before a constructive culture is what you're trying to build, where mistakes are okay and bad ideas, even from yourself, can and should be challenged. But building that kind of team takes some bravery, I think, from all parties. So you need to trust and you need to be brave and just lean in and make sure that you're working together.
It does. It takes bravery from the team members, because they still have to trust that, okay, they can really say what they think without negative consequences. And many people have had different experiences in the past. And they will be more cautious than others, but also it takes, I think, from the leader, it takes you need to have the courage to say, hey, well, yeah, you're right. You're right, and I was wrong. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but I find it is, in the end, it is positive. Of course, you don't want to be wrong all the time, that's for sure. But there are always some areas where any leader makes mistakes, and the great thing is if you have a team that steps in and says, hey, don't do this, this is a big mistake. And I had some really critical topics where people called me out and said, no, don't do this, don't go in that direction, you should do the opposite. And then discussing it through, I realized, yes, they were right, and I applied what they said, and the success was there. So it is on both sides. It takes some, you're making yourself a bit vulnerable, and you have to be okay with that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that I've loved about this discussion so far is that we've spent all of this time talking about leadership, and your beginning line about, like, simplifying supply chain, because it is very complicated or complex, as you said. Maybe we should start to talk a little bit more about that kind of supply chain, because it has changed immeasurably throughout your career. Okay, the importance of supply chain, and even more so in the last 5 to 10 years. How do you find negotiating across cultures as well? So you're managing across cultures, but also you've got this huge, big global supply chain. How do you understand the nuances or the differences when negotiating?
Yeah. I mean, negotiation is, you have that all the time, basically. Not only in informal contract negotiation, but you're negotiating with your peers, with your team, with your bosses, and so on. So it is I think it's really important to understand that there are cultural differences, but there are also a lot of commonalities. And the cultural differences are sometimes just extremes of the same. You will find if people are among the same culture, you find maybe the same factor, but it's less pronounced. So you could definitely generally speaking, in Asian cultures, showing face and saving face is a very important thing. But if you look at it in a European or US American context, you have the element of being treated with respect, which is not exactly the same, but it's also not completely different. So you just have, I think, you have to think through the things you would do negotiating within your own culture. You just have to be more sensitive to it. And definitely one element, and that is where there's quite a difference, is how confrontational do you want to be in a negotiation? I mean, there's this technique of really coming in with very strong demands, pouncing on the table, and so on. That is mostly found, I would say, in the Western world, and in Asia maybe not so much. There is trying to preserve the forms, trying to sound a bit consensual, even if there's some real differences on the topics. So in the end, a Japanese could pound on the table in negotiation, but when that happens, well, it's not clear whether the negotiation can even go on. But a US American would do that in an early stage, just trying to upset the table. But you have to be aware that there are some differences. Not all cultures accept the same, and generally speaking, I think it's in cross-cultural negotiations. It's better to be a bit subdued, a bit careful, because you don't want to break some eggs that are not necessary. You want to be a bit more cautious, and then, of course, when you get to the subject matter, when there's different positions, you will negotiate on the positions and hopefully on the interests behind it. But you on the formal side, how you approach it, I think you want to be a bit more careful, a bit more soft-spoken. I think being soft-spoken, but having clear objectives on the substance of the negotiation and being clear about those topics, that works well. But why wouldn't you be courteous and a bit more subdued instead of brash?
Have you ever seen a negotiation fall apart due to cultural misalignment? And would you have you taken some of that example and experience and been able to, educate people moving forward?
Yeah, I've seen, luckily not total failures, but negotiations that seem to be in quite a corner because of one side being very pushy and the other side becoming very, very stiff and not offering any flexibility or any way to get out of it. And I've seen that becoming really like a trench war. Like one side has been pushing until the other got really stiff and resisted, and then there's no progress anymore. And of course, in that moment, you take a break. You get your both sides get their teams together and discuss where they stand. But it's always a good idea to take a step back, not focus on the trench you're in and say, hey, what do we really want to achieve? Can we maybe move to via a complete different path? And then after the break, start with something completely different, a different approach. That works really well. If you're somehow stuck, you think of a different approach and try that out. But always, I think the one key thing is always showing respect. That is something that goes down very poorly in many cultures, as if somebody lacks respect because they think that it might not be mean. They just think, hey, that's a good tactic. It's I'm really brash. I say what I want, but it can really bring your negotiations into a dead end.
And we won't mention any political figures that are currently
far be it from me. Yeah,
that are on every newspaper in the world with a very similar way to negotiating. Okay, so at the beginning of that section, I spoke a little bit about the importance of supply chain and the change that you've been a part of. Let's look at the 5 years post-COVID. Okay, supply chain leadership has shifted dramatically. Have you changed your expectations on the pressure or of today's supply chain, and how do you lead in that environment?
Yes, there has been a massive change where I think the past 20 years or so, things have been working quite nicely, like a well-oiled machine. Of course, some hiccups, but not major ones. And with COVID, for the first time, we have seen an external disturbance really completely overthrowing what we have been doing. And this has given, on the plus side, this has given supply chain a very different visibility with top leadership than it had before. And a friend and former colleague of mine who is also in supply chain once said, have you ever called up your water provider to thank them that every day you have clean water running from your tap? Well, probably you haven't, because we assume that that's all normal. And this is the way supply chain has been treated. Okay, it's like they're in the back room, in the machine room, and it's just working and everything is fine. But then we realized, no, the global circumstances are such that you can't take many things for granted anymore. Things you thought were completely on the safe side become risks. You need to find new ways of doing things, second sourcing and different approaches. And this has really elevated the visibility of supply chain, but it has changed, I think, the way of work of supply chain. It has made, and actually in a way that suits me well. I told you I'm very interested in history and politics and all that. And it turns out you're better off if you have some understanding of that, because this can guide you, this can inform you where are there challenges ahead. And when we made sourcing decisions, localization decisions, it was like very much based on financial assessments. It was based on risks, natural disasters or whatever. It was on looking at the trade route. But today we have to look much more at political factors as well. So supply chain has become has to deal with many more things. And what I also found is that in a complex environment, many of our colleagues in different functions are a bit at loss. But for supply chain management, this is we are dealing very much with these complex systems where there's lots of influences, and supply chain management can take some guiding and coordinating roles for the company. I think that's really interesting. So I expect the work of supply chain management to stay interesting and maybe even becoming. It doesn't need to be to become more interesting, but it could well be.
Yeah, the drive for digitalization for sure, but also I'm quite interested in you as a leader at the kind of apex of supply chain. How has it been managing up when the pressure's on and as you said, you've gone from the machine room to the boardroom importance? How have you managed to manage the pressure, I suppose?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is managing expectations, because you get confronted then as a supply chain leader, you get confronted with expectations from the CFO, expectations from the CEO, expectations from commercial colleagues, which might not all be realistic, or at least when we one thing in supply chain management, we are very used of thinking in these triangles. The trilemma, okay, you can get big achievements in maybe two sides of the triangle, but then the third node is the one that suffers. So we are very much used to these dilemmas, and we have to make that clear. We have to say, okay, look, we can reduce inventory, but it will increase risk of lost sales. And so on. We have to be clear about managing expectations. Also, in pharmaceuticals, we are really much handcuffed in many areas, at least when it comes to quick change. It's often, we have to work very closely with the regulatory team to understand what can we change quickly and what takes more time. But this has to be made transparent. We have to explain to top leadership, okay, this is a risk right now, and we have a plan to mitigate the risk by diversifying, second sourcing, and so on, but it's going to take 2 years, and it's going to cost 5% more on cost of goods, or something like that. We have to be, what we have to avoid is to say all the good things can be had for free, because that's not how the world works. And we have to make the drawbacks really transparent.
And it's also managing the factors out of your control, because we've had so many differing in the last 10 years, so many differing once in a generation things that have happened, that it also becomes quite important to be reading the newspapers, to be understanding, as you said, history and politics, and also having an eye on the future of what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, we've talked about the 5 years after COVID and the complexities of that. What do you think the next 5 years have got in store for supply chain? Because obviously there's a big AI drive, there's a lot of changes in systems, SAP for HANA, etc. What do you think supply chain needs to do to stay at the strategic table and not just be operational?
Yeah, I think we have to go back to the drawing board, and in the light of today's challenges, we have to see, is our supply chain setup really the right one? So basically, I think we have, because nobody knows the future, we have to build scenarios. And for sure, one scenario would be, for example, the US isolating themselves and which would then mean, okay, you probably need to build a supply chain in the US for the US. That could be one scenario, but there could also be completely different scenarios. And we have to first think from first principles. The supply chain as we have it today has been built over decades, so it's legacy. Is it the right supply chain for those scenarios we consider to be likely? That's one thing. So the whole network design is one thing we have to do. But then, and there I think we get into the really interesting discussion on systems and processes. We definitely need a much stronger digitalization. We have to be able to have real-time data available, and we have to be able to analyze data, in generally speaking, in a much more consistent way, to make the right operational decisions and even to make the right networking design decisions. So I believe digitalization is a tool that we will absolutely need, because we will need more to have more flexibility, more adaptability, and we have to be extremely fact-based, because in an environment where there's more pressure on margins, more pressure on making the right decisions, we have to be very much fact-based.
Okay. And the next, as you said, it's been building over decades, the current supply chain model. Do you think that there's going to be decades worth of change in this next 5 years?
I think compared to, let's say, from the 60s to the tenors, the fifth, like 5 or 6 decades leading up to 2019, there has been change, but it has been more a gradual one, and much of the change has gone in the same direction. And then starting with COVID, we have seen much more disruption, and I believe we will continue to see a lot of disruption from different sources. Of course, there's now trade policies that could be. Then it goes away from the purely economic. It goes into the more geopolitical area, which is even tougher potentially. There might be new pandemics. The bird flu is brewing in the United States, present in many dairy cow herds, and so on. So we will have more disruptions in the next couple of years, and then going forward, I do think that like the past 50 years have been like a historical exception. If you look at history, then you will realize that disruptions and ugly things have been very, very common in history. So I think there will be more challenges going forward.
Yeah. So it's something that, as you said, the supply chain being at that strategic table, having more influence, it also needs to push itself as a function forward into that new era. The digitalization piece is super important, but I also think that we need strong leaders in that space. I would like to think that with supply chain becoming more important, the desire and need for bigger, more complex global supply chain leadership teams is going to be paramount for these organizations.
I think so, and I think one critical element that supply chain leaders need to do is we need to explain because I think we have unique insights, because we are bridging, there's the technical elements, the system elements, data, but also we have the insights, because supply chain is basically trade. That's why I said, Marco Polo was a supply chain guy. So we bring together so many different kinds of activities and informations. As a supply chain leader, I think we are in a good position to explain to top leadership what is happening in the world. We are, of course, not the right ones to explain what is the right commercial strategy, which are the products we should be developing and pushing. That's absolutely not my area. I would never talk about that. But then to say what is the right supply chain structure? How can we minimize risks for the company? How can we improve margins? How can we optimize the cost to serve? So we have a lot of things that we can explain to top leadership and really have an impact to the company.
Lovely. And I like this kind of forward-thinking part of the discussion that we have on active ingredients. So it's a nice segue there. Thank you, Frank. What I was going to say was, with the future of either leadership or life sciences, what excites you most? What are you thinking is going to be the coolest part of what's happening next?
Yeah, I think on one hand, contrary to what it sometimes looks like, the world is much more connected. That means there will be many more interactions across continents than in the past, and I really believe we will gain better understanding of different cultures and different ways to lead. We will not be able. We will not get to a situation where every country has an iPhone factory. Never. That's ridiculous. So we will not deglobalize. We will maybe regionalize in some areas, but overall, with the means of communication, we will be much closer together as the people of the world. That's one thing. I think that is exciting. And the other thing for the industry itself, I see that the pharmaceutical industry, medical devices, and we have an insight of biomedicine that is far, far superior to what we had even a couple of years ago. So there will be treatments, many more treatments for unmet medical needs, much more targeted, and so there will be diseases. And there are already diseases that had been absolutely deadly just 10, 20 years ago that can be very well managed or even treated today, and we will see more of that in the future. I think that's extremely exciting for the life sciences industry.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And what advice would you give to future leaders stepping into global or cross-functional roles?
I think the most important is to keep an open mind, listen and learn, and don't believe that you or somebody else or some culture has the gold standard on anything. You need to be really open-minded, willing to learn, willing to adapt, willing to change.
I was going to ask, what advice would you give to your younger self in that first leadership post? But it seems like that might be very good advice you've just given.
Yes, I would give that to myself as well. I believe I'm more open-minded and willing to learn than I was when I was young. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you've been putting that to the test as well. Some of the listeners will be able to find you on LinkedIn, but I'd say that out of all of the supply chain thought leaders, you've been able to create a good key opinion leader status on the LinkedIn platform. Have you enjoyed doing that?
Oh yes, very much. I think it wasn't that wasn't necessarily natural for me, but then over the years I realized, hey, this is something I've been there before. Hey, I have an answer to this. I have an answer to that, and then I realized I actually have quite some insights and experiences, and why not sharing that? And I found it is extremely nice and gratifying to do that, and then to get feedback. Hey, I really like this and this post, this and this video, and I get when I now get to industry conferences and so on. There's a lot of people who I didn't know that they were even watching my videos, because they were not the ones who liked it. I just watched, and then I get positive feedback from some people, and it shows me there is an impact, there is an interest in what I have to say, and I think that's the nicest motivation.
Yeah, and keep going. I really enjoy them. I think they're really good, and as you say, to push yourself continually seems to be a common theme for you, and I think that those posts are very full of value, very inspiring, and also, as I said, it's the way that you bring them to the fore. You've got a really nice communication style, and a lot of good information is shared. So thank you for those. Thank you as well for your input today. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think that it's clear your experiences across the globe and across a really complex functional area in supply chain has been an awesome listen, and I've really enjoyed today's conversation.
Thank you, Tom, and I enjoyed the conversation a lot. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank.